Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The Honorable Mrs. Dr. Sridayana Satro MPD as the first supervisor and Mr. Iman Santoso SPD MHUM as a second supervisor, I would like to thank you for giving me guidance and encouragement to complete my research paper. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Sridayana with student ID 17220450. I'm English Education Student 2017 in English Education Study Program, Faculty of Language Education, IKIP Siliwangi. This video is made for the requirement of my final assignment for my Sarjana Pendidikan degree in English. So, my research paper is under the title Teaching Reading Descriptive Text Using a Scientific Approach via Google Classroom. This here I will present my research paper. My research paper consists 5 chapters. Chapter 1 is Introductions. Chapter 2 is Literature Review. Chapter 3 Research Methodology. Chapter 4 Result and Discussions. And the last is Chapter 5 Conclusion and Suggestions. Alright, now we move to Chapter 1. Here we have research background. For the first one, I would like to describe about research background. English is the international language that needs to be learned by students in Indonesia. As stated by Chan et al. 2016, in Indonesia there is a government regulations that makes English as one of the compulsory subjects to be studied from elementary school up to high school level. In the era of pandemic and online learning, teaching is required to be active and creative in teaching reading descriptive text because it cannot be denied that there are still many students who are less active to dig up information from various reading materials. And then, after COVID-19 entered into Indonesia in mid-March 2020, the Ministry of Education issued a national decree that in the world of education temporarily eliminates face-to-face learning, which is then replaced with an online learning system using several online applications. And Kuzaire and Maulida 2017 said that learning English cannot be separated from learning 4 skills that must be mastered, namely listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And according to Hardiani and Wulandari 2020, there are several applications that can also help teaching and learning activities such as WhatsApp, Zoom, Weblog, Edmodo, and others. And then online application is an application that helps students in the independence of a site in Ognes et al. 2019. Google Classroom is one of platforms online that can be in use for learning activities, for example, teaching reading descriptive text. And then the problem of the study. In my research paper, I have 4 questions. The first one is, how are the scenario and implementation of teaching reading descriptive text using scientific approach via Google Classroom? And second one is, how are the students' responses towards learning reading descriptive text using scientific approach via Google Classroom? And the third one is, what are students' difficulties in learning reading descriptive text using scientific approach via Google Classroom? And fourth is, what are the difficulties of the teacher in teaching reading descriptive text using scientific approach via Google Classroom? And next, this is about research objectives. And then next, now we move to chapter 2, which is about literature review. Literature review discuss relevant theories related to the research. And the first one is reading. According to Harris 2019 state that reading is an attempt to obtain the meaning of the certain series of letters, and reading is a combination of experience and effort to understand various graphic symbols or printing pages. And then descriptive text. Descriptive text is a reading that aims to describe some things. These things can be anything, be it animals, objects, locations, and so forth. And then scientific approach. Daryanto 2014 cite in Maulida et al. 2018 relevated that scientific approach is a learning process designed in such a way that learners actively construct concept, law, or principles through the stages of observing, formulating problems, proposing, or formulating hypotheses, collecting data with various techniques, analyzing data, drawing conclusions, and communicating the concepts, laws, or principles found. And then Google Classroom. Google Classroom is a free collaboration tool for teachers and students. Teachers can create an online classroom, invite students to the class, then create the distribute assignment. Within the Google Classroom, students and teachers can have conversation about the assignment, and teacher can track the students' progress. And VG 2020. Now we move to the chapter 3. It is about research methodology. The type of research methodology that I use is descriptive qualitative with the data source, namely primary data from students of 7th grade junior high school. Research locations is in Kampung Tanjung Baru, Mandala Mukti, Cikalongwetan. For the data collection techniques, I use observation to know scenario and implementations, questionnaire to investigate student response, and interview methods to identify students and teacher difficulties. And for data analysis technique, I use the method data reductions, data presentation, and data concluding. And now we're in the quite of research paper, which is about result and discussions. And result shows there are 4 results. The first one is scenario and implementations. The scenario and implementations of teaching reading descriptive text using scientific approach via Google Classroom was carried for 2 meetings. Each meeting divided into 3 stages: pre-activity, main activity, and post-activity, based on lesson plan using scientific approach via Google Classroom. And the second one is student responses. Uninteresting and ineffective for these responses. Some students state that they do not have a Google Classroom account, so they could not join the learning activity. However, the teacher suggested that the students could use their relatives' mobile phone to open the Google Classroom. But in addition, some students state that it was easier for students to learn to read descriptive text using a scientific approach and could help students improve their reading skills. And the third student difficulties. 3 student difficulties. The second one is vocabularies. Some students state that their lack of English vocabularies misery caused them to not fully comprehend to instruction or the descriptive text provide. And the second one is not have a mobile phone. they could not join the learning activities because of this problem, so they were feeling left in participating in the online learning. And the third is internet connections, so that some students are forced to follow the lessons, not to finish. And the next is the teacher difficulties. This here the teacher claimed that the lack of students' participation raised the teacher's concern in distributing the learning materials properly. This is lined with the difficulties experienced by students. So she argued that this problem could create a significant difference in learning outcome because not every student received the same treatment. We're in the last chapters of my research paper. It is about the conclusions and suggestions. So I can conclude. The first one is the method quite effective increasing student reading ability, and the second one is some students state that learning was not interesting and ineffective with the method used and the application used, and some other students state that they easily learned lesson with the method applied. Therefore, the student ability to read, describe text increased. And the third one is students face several difficulties, including lack of vocabulary, not having a mobile phone, and poor internet connection. And the last is the difficulty experienced by the teachers is the lack of student participation in learning activities. And then here are some suggestions. So that's all about my presentation. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.